Hey everybody, this is JDGaming back today with a very exciting deck profile for you guys. Lots of really cool things are happening in the game at the same time. We have just the other day, April 1st, was the release of our new Forbidden and Limited list, and with it came what people are calling Master Rule 5, where we're finally able to once again bring out our extra monsters that aren't blue over from our extra deck into our main monster zones. Of course, plenty of people are excited about synchros, myself included, fusions like, full �11𝗍 dolls, elemental heroes, and all that, but I wanted to start off with a revisit of one of my own personal favorite creations, what used to be called Brilliant Magical Reptiles. Now, that Brilliant Fusion portion is unfortunately banned at the moment, so we're just doing regular magical reptiles here, but it's just a fun, flexible rank 4 strategy that focuses on bringing out a spellcaster and some other free special summons in order to just make the best use out of your rank 4 toolbox as possible. So fully flexible, fully customizable. I think this is a great way to start, one, because I'm excited to finally play a deck of no link monsters, and because I think this is a nice one that you can customize and just play in whichever way you would like. There's so many different ways you can go about building this kind of a deck. It also was something I wanted to look at specifically because this April 2nd is the anniversary of JDGaming as a channel. This is the 6th year I'm doing this now, and there have been plenty of ups and downs. I've gone through a lot of things within my life and with this game, but I'm really excited to come back right now with all of the new cards that recently came out, the new rules that finally allow me to do stuff like this, and I just can't wait to share it all with you guys. So this is going to be a let's build as always. I'll go through and build the deck from the ground up, sharing my insight on why things are in here in the ways that they are, and hopefully that gives you some more ideas into how you may want to tweak the strategy for yourselves, because again, there's so many ways you can approach this strategy. If you just want to see the finalized deck profile at the end of the video, I do have a timestamp in the description box and a handy table of contents as always, so you can go and skip to the various sections, including that A to Z profile you're probably used to at the very end of the video. And if you have any other questions, you can always check out the middle sections or drop a comment down below as well. So without further ado, let's build regular magical reptiles. The first step in building any deck is to establish the theme and to build a core that supports the theme's goals, and as part of this I think it'd be handy to have a nice refresher on the Xyz summoning mechanic so that whether you've never played before Link monsters or it's been a hot moment since you did, you'll have everything you need in order to play this strategy. So one thing we're going to do very often in this deck is summon a monster like this level 4 Chocolate Magician Girl, which, having it on the field, will meet the criteria for summoning our 𝕮𝖫𝖇𝖑 from our hand. With two monsters that have the same level in play, we are ready to overlay or stack these two as materials on top of each other here, and then place a corresponding rank 4, in this case, Xyz monster from our extra deck on top, and that's basically the Xyz summon. And then once you have these materials, you would detach them, sending them to the graveyard from this card in order to pay the cost for their abilities. So for example here, we're able to detach a material once per turn off of King of the Feral Imps in order to add a reptile monster from your deck to your hand. So how does that really differ from Link summoning? Not much. You don't have arrows, and you just summon off of monsters of the same level is the gist of Xyz summoning. However, there is one really important and bizarre ruling regarding the Xyz materials themselves that I think is worth covering. So let's say we have these two monsters on the field. If they had an ability that said, if they're sent from field to the graveyard, you do yada yada, you would do that when you make a Link summon because these monsters are being sent from the field directly to the graveyard. However, in the early days of the Xyz summoning mechanic, it was ruled, because of cards like Sangan, that Xyz materials end up going into this weird state of limbo. They're Xyz materials and not cards on the field, and they never really leave the field. They just become part of this monster, and when you finally detach them to send them to the graveyard, they didn't go from field to grave. They didn't go from really anywhere to grave. They were just detached as Xyz material, so you would not be able to claim the effects of cards that say, if or when they're sent from the field to the graveyard, do whatever. However, if a card like Dandelion were ever to come back into the format, that card simply reads, if this is sent to the graveyard from anywhere, you just spawn 2 tokens. So you'd be able to use Dandelion whether you're Xyz summoning, Synchro summoning, or Link summoning, or Fusion summoning, Tribute summoning, whatever type of summon, and that's why, of course, that card's banned. But if you need a specific situation where a card is sent from field to grave, Xyz summoning is not the best way to do it, and that's also the reason why you don't want to be using pendulum monsters as Xyz materials, because they wouldn't be sent from field to your extra deck, they'd just fall back to your graveyard. Now that we've completed our quick and dirty tutorial on Xyz summoning and the relevant rulings on the materials themselves, I want to go and actually build the deck from the core up so you guys can see what I'm talking about here. All of the following cards in this segment are going to be played in triplicate, and I'll try to remind you that I'm playing 3 copies. I just want to save some space on the mat, so I'll just show one card as an example. So we're starting off with a full 3 copies of our Chocolate Magician Girl, who is a level 4 water spellcaster with 16 attack, 1000 defense, and 2 soft once per turn abilities, so if you summon 2 or 3, you could potentially use them all. First is once per turn, you can discard one spellcaster type monster, draw 1 card. The next is once per turn, if this card is targeted for an attack, you could special summon 1 spellcaster in your graveyard that's not Chocolate Magician Girl, make your opponent attack that new monster instead, and if you do, have the attacking monster's attack, which is a nice defensive layer if you happen to get hit by a hand trap, but realistically, Chocolate Magician Girl is going to be used as some kind of material most of the time, so I honestly forget that second effect exists sometimes, but try to keep it in mind. It could be useful depending on what you play against. Once you have that on the field, you can of course go and play things like 𝕮𝖆𝖇𝖑 like I used in the tutorial, but I actually want to talk about a different trio of spellcaster monsters that synergizes perfectly with Chocolate Magician Girl's first effect. That is of course the 𝗼𝗼𝖙 monsters. 𝗼𝗼𝖙 Damage Juggler, Hat Tricker, and Trick Clown are all monsters that we are playing 3 copies of each of in this deck, and it makes a lot of sense in this strategy. So Damage Juggler of course has 2 abilities that say you can discard it from your hand in order to stop basically any kind of damage, whether it's battle or burn by a card effect, and if this card's in the graveyard for any reason, you can banish it from the grave once per turn to add any other 𝗼𝗼𝖙 monster from your deck to your hand. That synergizes very nicely with our Chocolate Magician Girl, who can now discard Damage Juggler for a free draw, and then you can go banish it and add another card to your hand. Trick Clown works very similarly in that if this hits the graveyard, you're able to special summon it, or any other 𝗼𝗼𝖙 monster. Don't forget that's sometimes relevant if you want to bring back an Earth monster in Hat Tricker, for example. That summoned monster does lose all its attack and defense, and you do take 1000 damage, but very small cost to pay considering now we have 2 ways that we could just discard a monster off of Chocolate Magician Girl, get a free draw, and get a free monster to our board in the process. And the reason Damage Juggler works nicely in bringing out a second monster is because of 𝗼𝗼𝖙 Hat Tricker, who's the level 4 Earth here, 11 attack, 11 defense, has an interesting ability that generates counters instead of taking burn damage for you, but effectively you're using it because of its first effect that says if there are 2 or more monsters on the field total between both players, you could just special summon it from your hand, which is all we care about, because now you summon your Chocolate, discard the Damage Juggler, fetch a Hat Tricker, and if your opponent has placed any other monster, or you played something like 𝕮𝖆𝖇𝖑 from your hand, you can go ahead and drop this because you have 2 monsters on the board, and because he's a spellcaster, and actually all these are spellcasters, you can go and play cards like 𝕮𝖆𝖇𝑑 off of these as well. So very powerful cards. Again, I like playing 3 of each of these because any redundant copies, you're just going to discard off of Chocolate Magician Girl, and it makes a free draw effect very consistent. So what's not to like about that? Next up, we're actually talking about the reptile in the room here. 𝕮𝖆𝖇𝑑 is a card you're playing at 3 copies as well. It's basically the same type of card as this Nefarious Archfiend, Eater of Nefariousness, which I guess I'll now abbreviate to Neon because it kind of looks like that. Both level 4 monsters, same stat line of 1500, 200, and essentially these were like the familiar possessed type of monsters. So if you control a spellcaster, you could just special summon it to the field. You can only control 1 at a time, but you could summon as many of them as you'd like in a turn, which is awesome because if you use 𝕮𝖆𝖇𝑑 as material for your King of the Pharaoh Imps, you could go ahead and search another 𝕮𝖆𝖇𝑑, and as long as you control a spellcaster still, so like that Chocolate Magician Girl, or maybe you brought back a Trick Clown after detaching that, you could go ahead and special summon your extra copy of 𝕮𝖆𝖇𝑑. From there, they each have a bonus ability as well. 𝕮𝖆𝖇𝑑 says if this card dies by battle or card effect, even if it's killed by something like Solemn Strike, you could go ahead and special summon a monster with the same stat line that is not named 𝕮𝖆𝖇𝑑, which is perfect because Neon here does fit that criteria. And if Neon's in your graveyard, you could target one of your own monsters on your field during your opponent's end phase, destroy the monster you control, and then special summon this instead. But since you have cards like 𝗼𝗼𝖙 Trick Clown that'll come right back anyway, if your opponent does not clear your field through just attacking everything or kill you right out, you'll be able to just go and bring this guy back, have a Trick Clown maybe with it, and then just go for an Xyz summon without even making a normal summon in the following turn. So both interesting extra abilities. They're not necessarily key to the strategy. I'm playing them literally just because you could just drop them onto the board, but they are slightly better than Inari Fire and Ryuran, or not Ryuran, Ranju, I think was the wind version that just came out in Rira. But there are 2 more. These guys are good. You could add the others if you want, but I think these are perfect for the strategy as they are. This next section is kind of a bridge that takes us from the core of the deck and expands on it and takes us into what else we're teching into the strategy as well. So we obviously have our water Chocolate Magician Girl and our water 𝕮𝖊𝖇𝖑𝖊𝖓. Those are very nice attributes to have because we're able to overlay them for generic monsters or go for something like Bahamut Shark here. This card is finally playable again in Master Rule 5. It basically needs 2 level 4 water monsters to summon. Has 2600 attack that you're probably never going to attack with because you have a once per turn ability to detach a material from this card and special summon 1 rank 3 or lower water Xyz from your extra deck. This card cannot attack for the rest of this turn. Oh, what a shame. But it's totally fine because once you detach one of these materials off of a Bahamut Shark, you make off of this basic play. You could special summon Toadally Awesome straight from your extra deck. And of course, you guys have seen this in Paleos. You've seen this in a lot of other strategies that can take advantage of this card. Bahamut is basically the best enabler from this thing, and I think this thing needs to get hit because it's just ludicrous. But Toadally Awesome, of course, lets you go and negate one of your opponent's cards, destroy it, and then you could set that to your board. So if your opponent tried hitting you with free removal, you now have free removal to threaten your opponent back with. This card does not need to actually have any frogs or anything to use its ability. The detach abilities are just to special summon frogs from your deck, which you're not even doing here. And in order to negate your opponent's card, you just send an aqua monster like this to your graveyard, and then it has that grave ability, even when limited, to go back to your extra deck, or your hand, I guess, and then it goes back to your extra deck. So if you keep Bahamut Shark live, you could go ahead and summon it again the next turn with its other material. So that's basically what I mean. This guy will never attack. He's either going to get killed, be used as material for other things I'll talk about, or you just use this effect 2 times in a row and you're never going to be able to really attack with this 2600 attack. But Totally Awesome is quite that, just totally awesome. You could also go ahead and add one of your mini water monsters like Chocolate or 𝕮𝖊𝖇𝖑𝖊𝖓 back from your graveyard to your hand if it ever dies, if you don't think Bahamut's going to last. So lots of flexibility here. And honestly, this is one of those strategies where it doesn't matter that Totally Awesome's limited. Sure, it hurts in actual Paleo frogs, but in this deck, that's all you need. Bahamut Shark 1 copy, Totally Awesome 1 copy, and you can just keep bringing this guy out as many times as you would like, especially thanks to 𝕮𝖆𝖇𝖑𝖊𝖓𝖏 and things as well. So in order to help us make that, I have a few other cards I like playing in the main that synergize perfectly with the rest of the rank 4 toolbox, and that's what I really love. It's just the consistency throughout the entire engine. 𝕮𝖊𝖊𝖓𝖏 is a level 4 water machine monster with 800 attack, 2000 defense that says when this card is normal summoned, you could special summon 1 level 4 monster from your hand. So as a water level 4, you have tons of synergy. Use this to bring out a spellcaster, and you can just drop 𝕮𝖊𝖇𝖑𝖊𝖓 or Hat Tricker. You could go ahead and use this thing as one of your water monsters with any of the previous monsters that were water we talked about in order to leverage into Bahamut, or you can even combine it with a copy of, yes, your Aqua Mador. And why am I playing a vanilla monster in this deck? Well, it's because these are spellcaster level 4 water monsters. Don't care about the stats too much. It's going to be very rough for the opponent when you could summon out 2 of them at once with 𝕮𝖆𝖇𝖑𝖊𝖓𝖏, 𝕮𝐺𝑠 𝗍𝐺𝑠, and Rescue Rabbit here. So basically, if you normal summon this thing, you can go ahead and banish it from the field, or I guess you could special it off of 𝕮𝐿𝐵𝐵𝐵 as well. Just summon 2 copies of Aqua Mador from your deck. They will die at the end of the turn, so you have to use them as Xyz material. But since they're spellcasters, level 4 and water, it's perfectly fine to draw into 1 or summon 2 off of these things. I love the fact that Rescue Rabbit banishes itself for cost, because I've been playing a lot of games against Destiny Hero Plasma and similar skill drain-esque effects, and this card just does not care about any of that. And it's just a very powerful extender for the strategy in order to just bring out monsters that fit perfectly in your theme, and you can imagine the craziness of this deck if you were to use a Rescue Rabbit, summon multiple Aqua Mador, bring out a 𝕮𝖊𝖇𝖑𝖊𝖓, overlay for King, summon another 𝕮𝖊𝖇𝖑𝖊𝖓 from basically your deck to hand to field, but you just keep making more plays from there. So lots of ways that we can expand all of our stuff. I did want to show the play sets of these guys just because they're all different. I thought that was kind of fun just for flavor when I play this. But yeah, that's how we're fleshing out the main portion of the deck. And then in the next section, we'll talk a little bit more about the tech to finish everything off. So to further augment our strategy, we're going to be fleshing out the main and extra deck in order to basically have the best rounded toolbox that we can make. So we're starting off with a copy of Foolish Burial. Fairly self-explanatory. You're mainly hitting your Damage Juggler or Trick Clown in order to just get a free monster onto the field, and then that just gets all your combos going without using your normal summon. We also have Monster Reborn, which does a similar type of thing, just bringing a monster back from the graveyard. I play 1 copy of the Phantom Knights of Shade Brigandine, which is just a trap that says if you have no traps in your grave, you can just set this card, activate it the same turn, summon it as a monster in defense. It's a Warrior Dark level 4 monster, and you just leverage that as just a free material in order to keep making plays. This is just a one of as a tech here. You could honestly cut this and play something else if you wanted to. We're playing 3 copies of Called by the Grave, mainly to deal with hand traps. It's not that this deck dies to hand traps by any stretch of the imagination. A lot of times you're able to just summon your chocolate, summon a 𝕮𝖫𝖇𝖑 or a neon, and then just go off from there. But a lot of times I found myself, if I don't have Called by the Grave, I'm afraid to normal summon Tin Goldfish or Rescue Rabbit for fear of effect failure, Ghost Ogre, something along those lines. And by playing Called by the Grave, you could basically shrug off all those threats, make all your plays, and as we'll talk about in just a moment, win the game out of nowhere just by having your Xyz play go off. So that's why we play the 3 Called by the Grave. It's because it's the best thing at just stopping our opponent's response to us so that we can do what our deck is trying to do. And then similarly, I like playing 3 copies of Forbidden Chalice. You could play Infinite Impermanence, honestly, but the main reason I chose this here, it's a spell card, so it's not going to interfere with Shade Brigandine. But this thing's a quick play spell that says target a face-up monster on the field. Until the end of the turn, it ends up gaining 400 attack, but its effects are negated. This thing mainly outs things like 𝗍𝗿𝗍𝗑 or any other Omni-Negate type of card your opponent may have. Just activate this, you could go off with your plays and pretty easily pick apart your opponent's board once they have their negates and stun cards out of the way. The last 2 cards in the main deck are 2 copies of Pot of Desires, because you play so many triplicates and your Rescue Rabbit targets don't even matter because you're just gonna summon them anyway. You can use this as a further extender once you've gone and made like a couple of your summons. If you need more resources or you get stopped, just play Desires and you can just unbrick your hand is basically what this card is good for here. So that's the main deck here. For the most part, I'm actually short 2 cards and I'll go through them with the extra deck because they're very intimately tied with the cards I chose to play. We're going through the extra deck now. So we have Abyss Dweller. This thing, of course, shuts out the graveyard for an entire turn. It's a quick effect and it's just a lingering effect after that, so it's very hard to stop. Plus, it starts off at 1700 attack, and if you happen to use water monsters, which this deck has plenty of, you gain 500 attack while it has that material. So 2200 attack, quick effect that can shut down your opponent's graveyard. It's a very powerful card that even if your opponent gets off the field, could seal the game for them if they can't make a move for a turn. Castel is probably the most expendable Xyz monster in here, so if you need to play something else in the extra, feel free to consider cutting this. This thing is basically just detach 2 materials in order to shuffle a card on the field back into the deck, very much like Nightmare Unicorn, and it has a Book of Moon-like effect where you can just target a monster and flip it face down by detaching one of its materials, but I don't know, it's not a bad card, it's just that I tend to use other cards in this. Specifically, I like using Light Dragon at 𝗍𝖏𝖇𝖑. This is a new rank 4 monster that was not available in the previous incarnation of BMR, but it's a 2300 attack, 15 defense, rank 4 generic monster that says if a monster or monsters you control would be destroyed by card effect, you could just detach a material from this instead. Very similar to 𝕮𝖆𝖇𝖑. The effect that you care about is you could detach a material from this card, then destroy face-up monsters your opponent controls up to the number of at 𝗍𝖏𝖇𝑑 monsters you control. That doesn't target, it's just at resolution. Check the 1 at 𝗍𝖏𝖇𝑑 dragon you have here, pop one of your opponent's monsters, and it gets around a lot of annoying threats, like for example, Mech Knight Crusadia Avramax, which has been the bane of my existence for a while since my brother loves playing decks built around him. So just being able to get rid of a non-IP'd, non-targetable monster is a nice thing. Is it foolproof? No, but it's this nice piece of removal. I'd rather get rid of a card by not targeting than targeting and shuffling sometimes, but I could see where both could be useful, and that's why I put 2 of them in here, but I will say so far I've always summoned the at dragon. Or at 𝗍𝖏𝖇𝑑, so, you know, play whichever one is suitable for you, or if you can afford it, just play both. Daigusto Emerald lets you go and recycle 3 of your monsters in the graveyard in order to draw a card, and it's an Xyz monster, kind of a, I'll call it a throwaway Xyz monster, like King of the Feral Imps and Bahamut Shark, and we'll talk about why that's relevant in just a moment here. We have number 41, 𝗍𝗍𝖏𝑇𝑑, which is a card I honestly thought would be banned when it first came out, if we were to continue pre-Link era Master Rule 3 rules. And the reason for that is any non-link monster is basically forced to shift into defense position. If this card's in defense position, their effects are negated, they can't be activated rather, which is pretty ridiculous. And you do have a Wrecking Ball kind of invincibility ability if it's in attack position. So interesting card. I like having access to it just to shut off a lot of things. Again, doesn't work against link-centric strategies, but in this wide open format we're in, where Synchros, Xyz, and Fusion are so popular, I think this card has a spot in this deck, so we'll play a copy copy of him. And then number 60, 𝕮𝖃𝖊𝖓 the Timeless is another new card we didn't have before. Needs 2 level 4 monsters. You may have seen I use this thing in like my Danger Dark World deck because it lets you skip your next draw phase to detach 2 materials, draw 2 cards and discard 1, which fits perfectly in the strategy, but it has 2 other abilities that work nicely in this deck as well. You can skip your next main phase to special summon a monster from your graveyard, or you could skip your next battle phase in order to make one of your monsters you control get doubled its attack this turn, and that's going to come in handy. I keep alluding to it, but there's some good cards at the end of this extra deck that I don't want to spoil quite yet. 𝕮𝖃𝖊𝖓 nicely supports as well, so that's just a utility card. We have Tornado Dragon, which is just field control for spell and traps, kind of like Abyss Dweller's the grave control, and we have like @Dragon or @Ignister for monster control, I guess. And then 1 copy of Traptrix Rafflesia. This thing is in here just because you can copy Treacherous Trap Hole at any point. This is still the same combo I like playing from way back then. I cut all the other trap holes if I was playing any last time. I don't quite remember, but essentially you turn 2 of your monsters into Rafflesia, and at any time you can just send Treacherous from your deck to graveyard, blow up 2 of your opponent's monsters, and then keep making your plays. And then from there, Rafflesia ends up being another throwaway Xyz monster that you can use as material for a later monster that we're getting very, very close to. Treacherous could also be drawn and then just be played. Since you're only playing Shade Brigandine as your other trap card, they don't really interact with each other that much. Just blow up 2 of your opponent's monsters makes it very proactive and very powerful for more field control. So you have a lot of options, right? @Dragon or @Ignister pops a card without targeting. Castel shuffles 1 card away with targeting without destroying. Rafflesia can just blow up 2 monsters and have a huge change in impact. So that's why we're playing that. The last few cards I want to talk about here are the Utopia package here. So we're playing 1 copy of Utopia Double, which of course, if you summon this as a generic rank 4, lets you add a double or nothing from your deck to your hand and overlay it into number 39 Utopia, who now has double its attack to 5,000 and the regular ability to just detach a material, negate an attack, even its own. That's fine because you're going to attack, negate your own attack, and then play double or nothing, which says since you negated his attack, he goes up to 10,000 instead of 5,000, and now you can attack any 2,000 attack or weaker monster and just end the game out of nowhere. So if you go second, you could just end the game if your opponent has not thrown a negation body that will stop you here. And even if you draw double or nothing in this deck, if you can summon 𝕮𝖃𝖊𝖓, you can go ahead and double Utopia's attack to 5,000 anyway, then double with double or nothing to 10,000, or heck, if you have access to 𝕮𝖃𝖊𝖓 and you can search the double or nothing, you can go overboard and go 20,000 attack, which is just, it's absurd, but you know, it's possible in this deck. You could attack any monster and still win the game, which is, you know, kind of hilarious. But I also like playing Utopia the Lightning, mainly because you don't always want to invest all your resources into something like a 𝕮𝖃𝖊𝖓 with Utopia, and sometimes you can't afford to because your opponent has negations on board and you know you're not going to be able to win. If you're fighting something like Mech Knight Avermex, for example, like I mentioned, Utopia can get over that as well, because if he attacks, your opponent can't respond with any card effects until the end of the damage step. He has the ability there where he can pump himself up to 5,000 as well, which is quite nice. Unfortunately, that is a set 5,000, so you cannot 𝕮𝖃𝖊𝖓 that to double it. Basically, 𝕮𝖃𝖊𝖓 him to 5,000, and then he would try to reset himself to 5,000, which does absolutely nothing, and it'd be pointless. But still very powerful cards you could have just for flexibility here, because you know there are a lot of good rank 4 monsters, but I think these are some of the most flexible ones. And then the last card here is kind of a Utopia related card. It's number F0 Utopic Future. Needs 2 Xyz monsters with the same rank except number monsters. That's why 𝕮𝖃𝖊𝖓 kind of sucks, but King of the Feral Imps, Traptrix Rafflesia, Light Dragon, Tornado Dragon, Bahamut as well. Just throw 2 of your rank 4 Xyz monsters together, make this guy. He has an ability that says neither player can take damage from battles involving this card. This guy can't die in battle. If it would die by a card effect, you could detach one of its materials instead, and then just like 𝗵𝗔 Dragon, if he attacks a monster, at the end of the damage step in this case, just steal the monster you fought, and then you can attack with that. So this is another way you can get around problematic cards. Since you're already playing a bunch of Xyz monsters anyway, this is effectively your link 4 for the deck, if you will. Is it as good as 𝗵𝗔? In some ways it's better. It's like a wall that protects itself. It's worse in some ways because you can just shuffle it away because you could target it and all that, but imagine the resources necessary to bring out a link 4 monster when you're using Xyz monsters as your cards. Like, that's not the best use of your resources. So Utopic Future, it's kind of a compromise. It's a good card. It's not the best card, but it works nicely for what it's able to do in this strategy here. And then if you're missing S0, summon off of any rank up magic, you can just shut out your opponent for a turn. That card's still good, but I didn't like maining it. S0, I think it's 𝗵𝗍𝖊𝖓, and it basically says you can detach a material to make your opponent unable to play cards, and he has 1,000 attack for every one of his materials. He just bleeds a material every turn because you're shutting your opponent out from playing the game. So available, but I would play that in the side deck if I were you, just for the sake of consistency within this main deck here. If you watched the video in its entirety, Thanks! Hopefully you guys enjoyed seeing the creation of this deck as much as I did putting it together. We'll start off with the main deck here. We have a 40 card deck with lots of triplicates in Chocolate Magician Girl, 𝕮𝖏𝖇𝖑𝖊, Neon, which is a Nefarious Archfiend, Eater of Nefariousness, Performage's Damage Juggler, Hat Tricker, and Trick Clown, Rescue Rabbit, and 𝕮𝖆𝖇𝖑𝖊𝖓 and 𝐾oniglio de Soccorroso. And then we have a triple tin goldfish as well. We have our triple Aquamador, and that's it for our monsters. And we have triple Called by the Grave, 1 Double or Nothing, 1 Foolish Burial, triple Forbidden Chalice, 1 Monster Reborn, double Pot of Desires, and then 2 traps in the Phantom Knights of Shade Brigandine and our Treacherous Trap Hole for, again, 40 card main deck here. And then for our extra deck, we have our Abyss Dweller, Castel the Sky Blaster Musketeer, 𝕮𝖆𝖇𝖑𝖊 Emerald, King of the Feral Imps, Light Dragon at Ignister, number 41 𝕿𝖆𝖇𝑑𝖑𝖊 the Terribly Tired Taper, number 60 𝕮𝑔𝖓𝖄 the Timeless, Tornado Dragon, Traptrix Rafflesia, Bahamut Shark, and Totally Awesome. Then we have number 39 Utopia Double, number 39 Utopia Proper, number S39 Utopia the Lightning, and number F0 Utopic Future. That's it for now, but feel free to grab one of these videos on your way out. If you really enjoyed what you saw today, remember to subscribe to JD Gaming for more Yu-Gi-Oh videos. Thanks guys, this is JD Gaming, hope you guys enjoyed as always, and I'll see you guys next time.